Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat. Resolves.
Thank you.
Now, before you attack
Does
me,
anyone have an answer?
well played.
Good game.
Hello, my name is DJ. This is the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel, and we have a long-awaited and anticipated legendary creature from War of the Spark, and that's Feather the Redeemed. Everyone is hyped for this general. Let's take a look at Feather the Redeemed. Red, white for a 3/4 flying angel, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets a creature you control, exile that card instead of putting it into your graveyard as it resolves. If you do, return it to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So that means every instant and sorcery spell we cast when Feather's on the battlefield that targets any of our creatures just goes straight back to our hand. We get to rebuy everything, and this Boros commander gives us card advantage and comes down early at just 3 mana? Oh my gosh, just wow. I'm just so impressed with how Wizards of the Coast has been pushing Boros and giving us interesting generals that shore up some of the weaknesses of the color pair. It's really great. I think the first thing that everyone is thinking about is targeting cantrips. If you can play a small instant or sorcery spell that targets any of our creatures and it draws us a card, then we can just keep cycling that over and over again every single turn, giving us a lot of card advantage. We can also rely on pump spells that we can rebuy over and over again, or even some non-traditional spells that might give us some advantage. If we have a deck that's built around all of these cantrips that need Feather on the battlefield, then we're also going to need to protect Feather. And so that's going to be an important part of rounding out this deck, or any deck that revolves around the general this much. I think another thing we're going to look into is going wide. There's a few cards that synergize with creating tokens and going wide and copying spells that I think will be really interesting in this deck. And one last thing we're going to do is look at Feather and find out exactly how good this general really is. And I think that's going to be the first thing that we evaluate, because the first thing that we look at with Feather is we imagine the best case scenario. And the best case scenario is fun. Just look at Defiant Strike. This is one of these cantripping instants that we've been talking about. So we're going to be casting this not just on our turn, but every single turn, drawing multiple cards over and over again, and we keep getting this Defiant Strike back. That's amazing. Or look at Aurelius Fury. If we spend 4 mana, 2 for the casting cost and 2 for X, we can send 1 damage at Feather, or any other creature we want, as long as Feather's on the battlefield, and 1 at an opponent, and keep them from casting non-creature spells. And we could just keep doing this over and over again. We could even start pinging our opponent's creatures. Man, that sounds great. Just locking our opponents out turn after turn after turn. It's amazing. And then the whole time we'll have Monastery Mentor out on the battlefield creating prowessing monks, and then we'll cantrip a bunch of times and run over our opponents. This sounds amazing. And it is amazing. But we do have to take a step back from Feather and find out, well, how realistic is this scenario? How can we build our deck to reach this awesome goal? I'd like to create a small comparison, and that's with Feather on the battlefield and you casting Defiant Strike over and over again. And this scenario might help us understand some of the restraints on Feather. The card I'd like to compare it to is Mind's Eye. Mind's Eye is a 5 mana artifact. Whenever an opponent draws a card, you can pay 1, and if you do, draw a card. Mind's Eye is fine. It's not super duper impressive. You play it and it doesn't really do very much until you can invest that extra mana, and then finally you can start drawing cards on each of your opponent's turn. But one thing that a lot of people playing Mind's Eye has found out is that it is extremely mana intensive and somewhat vulnerable for the investment. I think Feather could have similar restrictions where we play this creature that is vulnerable, that we need to keep mana up to protect, and then we have these cantrips, but ultimately all we're doing is drawing a couple of cards every turn. We can see that the limiting factor for this type of strategy is mana. And that's always been a struggle with Boros. And so that's one thing we're going to want to keep in mind, is that when we have a lot of mana, we can snowball Feather into more and more and more cards and more ways to sort of get value off of playing our spells multiple times. But if we're crimped on mana, we might have a real big problem both drawing cards and protecting Feather and doing everything that we want to do. And so now that idea of Aurelia's furying people over and over again, you kind of realize, well, that requires so much mana. And another thing that makes me really nervous is that a lot of these cantrips are kind of useless without Feather, without buying them back over and over again. And so that makes me really scared, because no one would ever play Defiant Strike, and Aurelia's Fury is just kind of average without this engine going. And so be very careful when constructing an engine, because you need to give it the right support, the right fuel, and that means mana. So I think that cards are going to be really critical if they create mana. Smothering Tithe is going to be amazing, because that's going to give you this big boost of mana that you can use every single turn. Runaway Steamkin can create mana out of nowhere, and even though it's only proccing off of half of our deck, that's totally fine, because we're going to want to add that red, maybe to save Feather, maybe to deploy something else. And then finally, standard artifact ramp. Wayfarer's Bauble has been a soapbox that I've stood on for a while. Put it in your boros decks. It's really great. But I'm not just going to trash talk Feather. I'm just going to start off with a word of caution, so that now that we talk about all of the cool cantrips and the draw and the synergies we have with Feather, we can be truly excited. And let's start off with all of that targeted draw. We can target Feather, target another creature, and then do it all the time and draw and draw and draw. And so we do want this to be instant speed ideally, because then we can play it on each of our opponent's turns as well. Defiant Strike, Expedite, Crimson Wisps, Bandage, Heal, Nivinous Wisps. All of these are instant speed, 1 mana, drawing us card, cantripping, having tiny bits of value, but still really good. There's a few other cards that are really specific. Psychotic Fury. Target multicolored creature gains double strike until end of turn, draw a card. Oh my gosh, amazing. Balduvian Rage is a lie. It says it's an instant, but really this is a sorcery. And it's powerful enough to include in this deck. You do want some sorceries in this deck. It's fine if you can only cast it on your own turn. But when you have such a big effect, you might want to cast it every single turn. And then same thing goes with Accelerate. This is just another instant speed, Crimson Wisps or Expedite, whatever. It just costs 1 extra mana, but it's that good that we want to have a critical mass of these types of cards. You can sometimes have bigger effects for more mana, but we have to keep in the back of our mind that we might be pinched on mana. But I like Ajani's Influence. 2 white for a sorcery, put 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature, and then you look at the top 5 cards of your library, and then you can reveal a white card and put it in your hand, and the rest on the bottom in random order. So it lets you dig super deep and grow your Feather or other creatures. I think Ajani's Influence is a super fun card. I feel like many of these effects are interchangeable. If you're missing a couple or you have a few more that are more expensive, totally fine. But I think that there's a few cantripping cards that are a necessity. That's Shelter and Acrobatic Maneuver. The reason why is that these are protection spells that cantrip. This is what we need to protect your commander and keep your engine going. And they keep you moving forward. They keep the momentum going. Protection is going to be so important. We're also going to want cards like Sheltering Light, give it indestructible, and Scry 1. Ajani's Presence, give a few things indestructible maybe. And we might want to think of other cards that provide different levels of protection. Even things like Boros Charm or Teferi's Protection could be really good. And finally, on the back of all of these cantripping spells, remember, we get our original spell back. So every single one of these is basically gaining us a card. And if we cast multiple ones of these every single turn, like spell, and then we draw, that's actually 6 cards that we just naturally have in our hand, which means that we're going to reach our maximum hand size very easily. Thought Vessel and Reliquary Tower are going to be a necessity in this deck. I might even include Expedition Map to get a Reliquary Tower. Usually I'm a little bit dismissive of this effect. I feel like you only need 7 of your amazing commander cards to really take over a game. But in this situation, your card quality isn't good. It's your card quantity and your velocity that makes up the power of this deck. So you need to be able to hold on to all of your cards. All right, let's talk about how we can make Feather aggressive and angry and spectacular. Let's get extra combat phases with Seize the Day and get it back over and over and over again. Rally the Righteous is a 3-mana instant and it has Radiance. Untap target creature and each other creature that shares a color with it. Those creatures get +2/+0 until end of turn. So I mentioned going wide, I even showed you Monastery Mentor, and so if we do go wide, Rally the Righteous can be an anthem every single turn. It's amazing. And finally, we can play cards like Titan Strength. I like this because it has some scry attached to it, some card selection could be good, but any pump spell can get tons and tons of damage through. I also want some protection in this suite. Eerie Interlude protects our entire board, not just our commander, but mostly our commander. Boros Charm is an interesting one. We could just target a creature and double strike it every turn and get Boros Charm back, but just being able to one-off Indestructible could be really strong. And similar to Boros Charm, Archangel Avacyn will only protect your commander and your board once, and could actually be dangerous, wiping your tokens away if it flips, but I think it's a powerful angel that can swing games in your favor. You know, we shouldn't be afraid of wiping our board away, especially if we have the ability to create tons of tokens and get lots and lots of card advantage. So cards like Impact Resonance, we have the ability to deal a lot of damage and then deal even more damage turn after turn with this card. Fell the Mighty could destroy every other thing on the board, leaving Feather alone, and Chandra's Ignition can blow up everything, creating tons and tons of damage. This also has me thinking of that Aurelius Fury I mentioned before. With enough mana, we can kill people and creatures and really control the game with a card like that. And then we have a little bit of corner case interruption. So cards like Chaos Warp can remove a problematic permanent. Path to Exile can answer a very dangerous threat. Intimidation Bolt might be able to take out a creature and buy us an extra turn. But if we think outside the box, we can Chaos Warp our own creature with Feather on the battlefield and change it into something different. Probably an instant or sorcery or a cantrip, but that's okay. We have that ability to do that and buy Chaos Warp back. Path to Exile becomes exile one of your tokens and get a basic land onto the battlefield, and you get the path back. Because Feather doesn't need you to target Feather. Feather can have you targeting any of your creatures, and we could have just stupid tokens on the battlefield. Intimidation Bolt, we could bolt our own Feather, and then suddenly our opponent's creatures can't attack us. We can fog our opponent's combat steps over and over again. One more thing that's usually used on an opponent, Carry Zev's Expertise. It's a threaten effect. We gain control of target creature or vehicle, and then it gains haste until end of turn. And it has the added benefit of casting a card with converted mana cost 2 or less without paying its mana cost, so it's pretty good. But we can target Carry Zev's Expertise on our own creatures, giving them haste, and then letting us cast other spells for free, getting us multiple spells a turn at very little cost, and we're going to get these back to our hand because of our commander. The synergies are strong. These cards are my favorite, specifically Chaos Warp and Path to Exile. I would play these in any Boros deck. They're amazing, and they work well with my commander. So it means that their include isn't contingent upon my commander. It isn't making my deck worse by including them. I feel cards like Bandage and Titan Strength and Heal are actually making my deck worse unless I have the engines going. So that's why I really like those specific cards. They're probably a little bit more outside of a lot of people's budgets, but I really think they're a worthy include. So it sounds like we're going to be casting a lot of spells. So let's embrace the Spellslinger mentality. First, by making tons of tokens. Monastery Mentor goes wide and big as we storm off with tons of instants and sorceries. Young Pyromancer again makes lots of little 1/1 elemental creature tokens and comes down early. For playing lots of these little cantripping spells, Empty the Warrens can make a massive army of goblins. And as long as we're talking about Storm, Grape Shot's really awesome. We can aim our original Grape Shot spell at Feather at one of our other creatures in order to rebuy it, and the Storm is just an amazing effect. Let's also get some value. I mean, if we're just cantripping on every single turn, we should turn those cantrips into lightning bolts too. Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each opponent every time we cast an instant or sorcery spell. Thermal Alchemist, again, can tap to deal 1 damage to each opponent, but then when we cast instants or sorcery spells, we get to untap the Thermal Alchemist. I've play tested where Thermalchemist is doing 5 or 6 damage to our opponents every single turn. It's just a situation that they can't get out of. Electrostatic Field and Firebrand Archer do something similar, but they only do 1 with every spell cast. Gutter Snipe is a little bit more efficient, dealing 2. Thermalchemist can sort of chain stuff together. So those are my favorites, but you get a critical mass of these on the battlefield and suddenly your opponents just can't come back. And then we have some artifacts that do something similar. Sphinx Bone Wand is expensive at 7 CMC, but as you cast instants or sorceries, you put counters on it and you start dealing damage. This ends the game very quickly. Sentinel Tower is a little bit limiting. It does let you chain spells together and deal damage, but it's only during your turn. I don't know about that. Aetherflux Reservoir could give you a huge life boost as you cast a bunch of spells, gain a bunch of life, and then hopefully nuke someone with the reservoir. But my favorite way to deal incidental damage is Balefire Liege. This 5 mana 2/4 pumps Feather by +2/+2. Great. Whenever you cast a red spell, it deals 3 damage to target player. Awesome, just attacking players over and over again. And then whenever you cast a white spell, you gain 3 life. I just think this is tons of value as you play cards over and over and over again. And then finally, one thing that we have to pay attention to is if we're going to play a Spellslinger deck, do we want the Spellslinger equipment? Sunforger is what everyone's mind jumped to as soon as Feather came out, and unfortunately, it spiked the Sunforger. I do not think Sunforger is worth $9, which is what it's going for right now. So if you have one, I think it's a fun card, but if you don't have one, just maybe chill a little bit. I think that you'll be just fine. But I did have to mention it, and also mention Sunforger fetching Magnetic Theft, where you can fetch Magnetic Theft and then attach Sunforger back to Feather again, getting Magnetic Theft back, and then unattaching it over and over again to basically start pulling instants and sorceries out of our library for tons of value. The only reason why I really like Sunforger is it gives us access to those protection spells, which are so important for your commander. So I feel like a lot of people are going to build Feather the same, but I want you to keep in your mind the different ways that I've talked about building it. There's sort of like a very Spellslinger heavy way of building it. There could be an equipment way of building it, which could be really cool. There could be like a Voltron, I'm going to put equipment on and I'm going to pump Feather every turn, give it double strike every turn. That could be really cool too. I also think that a heroic deck could come together. And even though a lot of these might share pieces, I think that you could make something that is pretty unique to your own Feather deck. And Feather kind of has heroic. Heroic is a mechanic where when you target something, it gets value. And Feather says, yeah, let's do that. But Heroic came out of Theros, and so we have some cool Heroic cards. Annex and Cyanide, Phalanx Leader, Fabled Hero. Annex and Cyanide pumps your whole team and gives them trample until end of turn. Phalanx Leader just puts counters on them. Fabled Hero gets bigger and has double strike anyways. Other cool heroic cards could be a Crowan Conscriptor. Whenever you target it, you get to steal your opponent's creatures. With enough cantrips, this could theoretically steal your opponent's board turn after turn. Yeah, repeatable insurrection sounds great. Or we also have the way to go wide with a Crowan Crusader or Vanguard of Brimaz, creating 1/1s all over the place. And if we are going wide and targeting over and over again, then we can play cards like Mirrorwing Dragon, Zadahedron Grinder, and Precursor Golem. Let's read Mirrorwing Dragon. 3 red for a 4/5 Flying Dragon. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Mirrorwing Dragon, that player copies that spell for each other creature he or she controls. So we have 2 really interesting dynamics. Feather says when you target something, you get it back. And Mirrorwing Dragon says when you target something, it expands across your entire team. So if we're making tons of 1/1s and we say, I don't know, Giant Growth or Titan Strength, this Mirrorwing Dragon, then suddenly we've done a 3/1 Scribe boost to our entire team. Same thing goes with all of those cantrips. We cast a single Defiant Strike at Mirrorwing Dragon, and every single 1/1 we have on the battlefield gets +1/+0, and we draw that many cards. As you can see, this can chain together into something ridiculous. If you've ever seen a Zadahedron Grinder deck, then you know what I'm talking about, because that deck is built around this mechanic of playing a single creature, going wide, and then going crazy, producing mana, producing card draw. It's very fun to play. And Feather might give us a taste of that, a little bit less reliably, but it gives us more resilience, more card draw, more ways to be flexible. Maybe you go down this heroic route. Maybe you go all in on getting these amazing creatures and go wide. I think that Feather gives us a lot of options, and I want you to be challenged to not just build cantrips deck, to go out there and build something that feels fun, and to build something that's well-rounded. Give yourself the mana base you deserve. Don't play Feather on 3, play Feather on 5 when you have a shelter up or something like that. Give yourself time to build up your mana and develop your engine, because once Feather gets going, well, I'm confident that you're gonna just take over the game. All right, everyone, thank you so much for watching. I want to thank my sponsor, TCGplayer.com. If you want to see all of the critical pieces you need to build your Feather deck, click on the link in the description, and that'll take you over to their website where you can pick up some of the cheapest pieces for Feather available on the internet. And thank you for my patrons. You are amazing and you support me, and I'm so excited that you're here, because that means I can make even more Commander content on all these amazing generals in War of the Spark. All right, everyone, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.